Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, everyone out there. Almost at the end of the year, so we're looking back on one of my favorite topics, deals and money. So global deals, as far as mergers and acquisitions, in fact, general deals in terms of the globe, 2.9 trillion for the year, 17% drop. This is the first time in a decade that we've seen deals drop by double digits year on year. Now, why is that? It's because of geopolitical tensions, higher interest rates making a lot of valuations more expensive. We had two big deals in oil and gas, Chevron, and I think it was a $50 billion deal towards the end of the year that kind of pushed things up. In the fourth quarter of this year, I think 28% growth quarter on quarter from quarter 3 to quarter 4. But year on year, deals have come down. If you look at it by regions, Europe led the way, dropping by about 28% in terms of deals around Europe. The Asia Pacific region, second place, 25% drop. The US area, North America, only down by about 6%, showing you that America is still where the deals are made. It's still where a lot of interest is. We move on from there to China, and the turbulence that has faced China this year has led to a global unwinding of interest, or rather investments in China listed shares. So at its peak in August of this year, net foreign investment in China listed shares came out to $33 billion. However, since that time, between August and where we are now, we've seen a massive drop of 87% in China listed shares as far as net foreign investment is concerned. Well, why is that? China, of course, there's been a lot of issues in the property market. There's been a lot of issues in terms of liquidity. There's been a lot of issues with respect to whether or not the People's Bank of China will support the economy. We haven't seen that. Here's a quote from a wealth manager, chief investment officer at a wealth management group I think it's listed in Hong Kong. Says the confidence issue goes beyond real estate. Although real estate is key, I'm referring to consumer confidence, business confidence, and investor confidence, both from domestic and foreign investors. Yeah, Wang Qi is his name at UOB K Hian. I think we go from there to the G7. The United States, we know, are coming up on the second anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war, the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The United States is behind the scenes, according to the Financial Times, pushing for the G7 to seize the assets that have been frozen by Russia to the tune of about $300 billion. They're exploring the legal framework of how that is going to work. They want to show solidarity to Ukraine by February of next year, which would be 2 years since the war started. So they're still exploring it, still a behind the scenes thing, but they want to put more pressure on Russia. Well, by the way, they've diverted oil sales to China and India. Russia, of course, has a very well diversified economy, gas, oil, wheat, you name it. Only one of 4 countries that have been to the moon. So the Russians are really, really strong. We'll see how this works out. We get to Apple. Dr. Abati mentioned this yesterday. There's been an update on Apple's, the temporary ban on their Ultra 2 and Series 9 watches. They got a temporary reprieve from a U.S. federal appeals court, which granted an emergency pause. They want to essentially allow for a last-minute review of whether or not the changes that Apple has made to those 2 watches will allow them to be able to sell them. So remember Massimo, that blood oxygen level review thing in the watch that they brought a patent for. They won. They put the ban on. In fact, if you go to Apple's website now, you won't even see the watches on sale yet. But between now and I think January the 12th of next year is when a decision is expected. Between now and then, Apple will be allowed to make those sales. I think as for globally, 5% of watch sales are attributed to Apple, although it doesn't come close to where iPhone sales are for them. We move on from there to, I think, electric vehicles. And if you look at the global auto sales, right, you can see BYD at number 9. So you've got Toyota, Volkswagen, Hyundai, Stellantis, Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, General Motors, Honda, Ford, BYD, and Suzuki. So BYD, for an electric vehicle maker to be in the top 10 is pretty impressive. But then remember, Europe came forward with concerns that China was unfairly subsidizing its vehicles and flooding the markets. So question of the day, right, which I would love the 3 of you to weigh in on, is should China, as far as electric vehicles are concerned, should they be allowed to compete? I saw a very interesting debate. I was on CNBC yesterday. Take a listen to these 2 analysts and their takes on whether China should be allowed.
Let me ask you a direct question, because we don't know what the labor conditions are in BYD. We don't know. The Chinese government can subsidize them. Should BYD cars even be allowed ever into the U.S. market?
Well, absolutely. I'm a capitalist. I don't think we should.
But they're
close
not.
the market.
But China's not.
Yeah, I know, but that's their, government and their choice. America doesn't change capitalism just because we don't like a certain group of people, right? So, Chinese should be able to sell cars here just like everybody else.
I don't think it's liking them. I think what I worry about is we covered the UAW strike extensively, right? These are hardworking people in Detroit just trying to make a living, like the middle class dream. BYD could be paying people $5 an hour to make a car. We could never compete with that, Ross.
Right. And I think that's the government's job to set tariffs and policies for trade. It's not really like we should just decide not, consumers also actually make this decision of whether they want to buy a Chinese car. And I think that's the biggest factor that BYD faces, that American consumers don't want a Chinese car. So if you see what Geely did by buying Volvo and using the Volvo brand, even though it's a Chinese company, that's, I think, a much smarter strategy to breaking into Europe and the United States market. So I think the biggest risk BYD has is the fact that Americans just won't buy Chinese cars. But keeping them out of the market isn't really, capitalism.
I think we said the same thing about Japanese cars in the late 60s. No one's going to buy them. They're small and cheap looking. I think we said the same thing about Korean cars, Kia and Hyundai in the late 80s and early 90s. We're still saying that about French cars, and that's okay because it's accurate. But you get my point, Gordon, which I wouldn't underestimate China. Do you think they should be allowed in the U.S. market?
Absolutely not. And let me tell you why. Ross kind of is not focused on the specifics here. China has three key subsidies. Cheap labor. They use slave labor to manufacture a lot of their products. Artificially low, basically borrowing costs for their banks, and artificially low energy prices. That is not fair. That's not a level playing field. That's not capitalism. So to allow those cars in here and them to undercut the American automakers, thus killing jobs here, creating jobs over in China, I think is unfair. And Ross knows this, right?
But we're subsidizing EVs here in the United States.
They're taking subsidies away from even Tesla because they're making a lot of their batteries, some of their batteries in China and shipping those cars over here. So you got to level the playing field. You can't have guys using slave labor to make their cars and then shipping them into America where we have to pay competitive wages. That's not fair. That's not capital.
All right, finally in Nigeria, I can't forget Nigeria. We have the CEO of the FCCPC coming on the Global Business Report, Mr. Babatunde Rukela, to talk about this $110 million fine against British American Tobacco Nigeria. Also, the regulations they're going to be bringing forward in 2024 on the digital money lender. So looking forward to that. That's our update for today.
So, Rotus, let's go on this debate. You see,
electric vehicles, right?
Yeah. I totally support, and nobody should stop China in the bit of being delusional with this talk about, capitalism is not fair, China has a lot of subsidies. The West bloody does it too. Everybody does it. It's business advantage. People understood this in the late 1800s. That's when they set up something called the Shaman Act, the first antitrust, anti-competition act. Any market will have to put that cap in place, but let's not be delusional. Everybody, the West that is crying foul today too, used to do it. Everybody was doing it. Just like, is it fair for me as a local designer competing with Adidas or Nike that is going to use some cheap slave labor in Bangladesh? It's not fair.
So how are you competing?
Listen, nothing is fair in business. That's why you have competition czars and bureaus to be able to nip it in the bud. But the West crying this is just being hypocritical. They did it many years ago. They made very, very big, strong concessions for their own companies. It is us and that's why you see I always have a problem with our government here. It is our government that is not wise, that is allowing businesses to die and supporting them. Okay, only yesterday, weren't you taking the story so triumphantly of Israel giving Intel 3-point-something billion because they wanted to compete? So they wanted them.
That's an incentive, though.
It's an incentive.
And it's going to the company to come into Israel.
Is it not to make life easier for competition?
Well,
is it free money?
I don't
so let's stop complaining. Everybody does it. It's business advantage. You get me? Is everybody does it. They are able to subsidize all their downlines and even we in media, we do it.
But do you remember when Donald Trump called China, when Trump said that China should be called a currency manipulator, that they were artificially lowering the value of their currency in order to make their exports cheaper to the rest of the world? China is not a
Rotus.
and China doesn't allow, Facebook is not allowed in China.
Rotus.
WhatsApp is not allowed in China. Twitter is not allowed in China.
Rotus.
China is, you are suppressing competition from outside, but then you are subsidizing your own products to sell it. So China is not playing fair. China is not playing fair.
Your point. You are a business analyst.
I'm a capitalist to the end.
Me too, I'm a capitalist. You're a business analyst. You remember what they called the Hotel Plaza Agreement in '85? About currency manipulation with the yen.
Yes. It's not fair.
It's not today it's been happening. What I said is you will use your anti-competition to be able to nip them in the bud. Like tariffs and all of that.
But that was
you saying they can't do it. There's always been a trade war from time immemorial. You remember the corn laws? You remember the corn laws in 1845?
It still boils down
to it.
Trade war between the West and China.
Everybody does it.
To be honest, all is fair in love, war, and business.
That's
because
just it.
at the end of the day, it's who has the comparative advantage. I love the argument made by both parties, but to be fair, each country would find out where their own trade advantage is. For China, even though the West doesn't agree, and unfortunately, the West has always been the determinant as to who is doing what is right. They don't look inwards because when their own, when it comes to tech and they take their businesses to Asia to get cheaper labor, they don't bring that into question as well. I know that when it comes to China, yes, all eyes on China because they find a way to give. They are, able to make their products cheaper through certain conny ways, right? Setting backdoor ways. But at the end of the day, it's only for the US to then push back. Elon Musk, being of US, and BYD is backed by Warren Buffett as well. So there's also some form of Western influence. So for him, both ways, either ways he wins. But I do think that it would then be the onus will be on the US to put up whether trade tariffs, laws, but to prevent them from coming in. I think that it's going to. I think it would do more harm than good when it comes to business. It's a level playing field. Everyone brings in what they're able to do, and the US does it a lot when it comes to their own advantage. That's why
the issue here is trade protectionism.
Yes, sir.
The other issue is competition. The third issue is the fear of China. Now, let's start with the last one. The fear of China, to the extent that, this long competition between the US, Europe, and China, whether it's copyright, whether it is trade, has been there. Competition, who will become the most dominant on the world scene. The fear is also because, the Chinese, they are constantly innovating. Yeah. Look at how they've dominated the steel industry. The fear is that in the EV market, if care is not taken, China will again dominate. So this is the rivalry that has been between China and the US and also with the EU. The US says by 2032, 2/3 of every vehicle in the US should be an electric vehicle. Now, the EU, the Eurozone is even more ambitious. They say that by 2035, all those vehicles should be electric vehicles in Europe. But as of today, China is the most dominant producer of electric vehicles. Technology, innovation, subsidies, a race to dominate that market. And the cost is part of the problem. An average EV from China costs between $5,000 and $90,000. It's far more expensive in Europe if you want to buy an electric vehicle. And China produces already about 92 brands. So it's going at a pace that it can overrun.
Yes, no.
It can overrun the American market. It can overrun the European market. Yeah. So that's what trade protectionism that we find, and this is an old method. Yes, no. That countries have always used. They protect their own environment in international trade, so that you don't turn their environment into a dumping ground. Yes. Because you have better prices. Now let me talk about the other issue about Apple.
Apple, yes.
Yes, I brought it up yesterday. So what they got is an interim order just for this holiday season, okay? It's not as if the matter with Massimo has been resolved, but at least during this holiday season, they can sell. Yesterday, Apple stores started selling the watches, Ultra 2 and Apple 9. And then, of course, from today, Those watches will be available online, just in case you are interested. You know, you are a keep fit buff, so that you can check your blood oxygen levels. Anyway, but there's another issue about copyright, about intellectual property raging in the US. The New York Times has sued Microsoft for copyright violation, for using its generative AI, you know, to copy his materials, to reproduce his material, to in fact, you know, make money from it. And they are quoting settled copyright law. Yesterday, New York Times went to court in the southern, in the U.S. District Court of the southern part of New York. And they're saying that it is settled copyright law that if you are going to use another person's material, you seek permission. But that Microsoft has not been seeking permission, and that they have been losing, or at their own end, billions of dollars in revenue. And the fear, of course, is not just New York Times, of content creators, is that if those who use, who promote generative AI continue to take their materials, people may not go to new sites again. And then they will lose revenue. So you have these copyright issues coming up here and there. The other day, we were discussing business leaders of the year in Nigeria. Well, I just noticed that CNN has chosen Sadela of Microsoft as the business CEO of the year.
Satya Nadella.
You know, beating Jamie Dimon and others. But I don't know who your global business person of the year is.
Likely give us some.
Maybe Sam Altman.
You need to go.
I think it's
Thank you so much, Rotus.